late for lunch, but that's okay. Let's get started on this video. Today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Fed lied or if the uneducated economist is just a pure genius. Now, I'm going to pull from this speech here from Michelle Bowman. This was given April 5th, 2024, so it was just the other day. And the title of this is Risk and Uncertainty in Monetary Policy, Current and Past Considerations. So talking about the monetary policy. Now, I'm not going to go through this entire speech, although we probably should, and we might do that for our members-only live stream this weekend. I think this would be a great speech to cover for that. I'm just going to go and talk about a couple of different points inside of this speech. And I want to thank Brody for asking a question about one of the analogies that I had used in a previous video, and we're going to cover that question here at some point in this video. But here we go. This is what I wanted to bring up from this speech. Now, it has been my impression or my understanding or the impression that I have gotten from the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy is that they were never attempting to shoot for, not that they were never, that they have recently changed the way they conduct themselves, and they are no longer going for a 2% target, but going for a 2% average inflation rate over time. And in this speech, she reiterates that. Michelle Bowman does. Goes on to say like this: another notable change to the strategy statement was the adoption of what some refer to as asymmetric flexible average inflation targeting or temporary price level targeting. Specifically, the new statement noted that in order to achieve longer-term inflation expectations at its 2% goal, the committee seeks to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. Therefore, judges that following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. And then goes on to talk about that, and about how they achieved a 2% over time. But then goes into saying something about the supply chain and inflation. And this is really where I think that I had called the Fed out as liars, saying that, no, this is not right. You guys are not, stating this genuinely. They're not being genuine. Like, they're not authentic when they say it, right? Because they knew the issues with the supply chain was causing inflation. And as much as people want to look at the money printer go burr and all the money spending and all that other stuff, the government, it was really the supply chain breakdown that did it. I noticed it within lumber. It gave me the ability to call out lumber prices really accurately. And here we have lumber sitting at its normal price. Even prior to the pandemic, we're sitting at a price that would be considered average, right? $550 per thousand, way better than the $1,700 per thousand that everybody was looking at, saying that money printer go per, lumber prices go up. It was very inaccurate. It was a supply chain breakdown. She reiterates that here. The supply and demand imbalances likely amplified, not caused by, but amplified by fiscal and monetary policies led to a sharp rise in inflation over the period of just a few months. I totally agree with that, because that's exactly what we saw happening within the lumber industry before we saw the supply come back to lumber, because it's a well-established, well-functioning, industry within this nation that almost instantly came right back. Now, here we go, guys. This is where it really gets important. We're 4 minutes into it. Okay, so this is really where it gets important, and where it is that the Federal Reserve lied, right? And I can call it out because I did a video shortly after this statement was made. Now, this is from the speech that was just given the other day, but she's talking back to like early 2021 or so. All right. The September 2021 Summary of Economic Projections showed the medium FOMC expectations, the Federal Open Market Committee. Remember, the FOMC is the voting members of monetary policy. So it's not Jerome Powell, it's not the president, it's the FOMC who votes on monetary policy. So the Federal Open Market Committee expectations for personal consumption expenditures, the PCE inflation, of 4.2% at the end of 2021. Largely reflecting high inflation readings in the first half of 2021. But for year-end 2022, the median expectation was for the PCE inflation to decline to 2.2%. This is what everybody back there in the Federal Reserve was thinking back in 2022, that the inflation was going to decline to 2.2%. Private sector forecasters expected higher inflation of 5.1% at the year end of 2021, but also projected slowing to just over 2% by 2022. So not only did the Federal Reserve, but then private sector forecasters expected pretty much the same thing, of the inflation of 5.1 at the year end of 2021, but also projected slowing down to 2% by the end of 2022. So this is not only what the Fed anticipated, but this is also what the private sector anticipated, that the inflation was going to be dropping significantly by the end of 2022, right? The Fed and the private sector said this. Why? With the benefit of the hindsight, we now know that most of those forecasters, ourselves included, talking about the Federal Reserve, vastly misjudged the persistence of inflation at the time. They misjudged the persistence of inflation at the time. All right? With a 5.9% PCE inflation for both 2021 and 2022. This example underscores the challenge we faced in identifying which factors was driving inflation and how long those forces would persist. Right? So their forecasters missed it. They were saying, oh man, we're going to get help from the supply side of things once that gets rebalanced, and we're going to see inflation come back down by the end of 2022. Now, here's the thing. I did this video, and I'll give you the date on it. Oops. Gotta turn that back up. Now, I did this video on June 2nd of 2022, right? So remember, they were talking towards the end of 2022, they would see inflation come back down, and they were going to get help from the supply side of things. And they were saying that the forecasters themselves, oh man, we missed it. We didn't get it. Our projections of inflation coming down didn't come out the way we had thought. Everybody got it wrong, except UE. Now listen to this.
They are going to raise rates to try and put a pressure on demand. Now tell me, when the Federal Reserve says, and we are hoping that we are going to get some relief from the supply chain side, think about those two things for just a second. They are going to put a pressure on demand, right? Put pressure on demand, put it down. We don't want as many people making purchases. And at the same time, they're saying, okay, supply chain, go ahead and do your thing. And the supply chain is sitting over there going, we're a bunch of entrepreneurs over here. And although we know there's a bunch of stuff over here, and we know there's a bunch of people over there, but the people over there, you're telling them that you don't want them making as many purchases. So we, as entrepreneurs who know that there's a bunch of stuff over here who need to get it to the people who are wanting to purchase it, but you're telling me that you don't want them purchasing as much stuff, but you want me to invest my time, my money, my effort, my skills, my knowledge into trying getting this material, these products, this stuff to the people that you don't want purchasing it. Okay, tell me again, you want my help for what? As the supply chain side of things? You see where I'm getting at? The Federal Reserve is screwing that part up. They're not thinking clearly, obviously, that if they raise rates, that they are going to put pressure on demand, and if they put pressure on demand, then why would the entrepreneurs want to try and supply no demand? Or
you see, I could let it go on, but you guys get the point. Right? So back then, when they made that statement that we are hoping to get relief, get help from the supply side of things, as the supply starts to come back, the supply chain starts to be reestablished, it's going to bring inflation down. And I said, no way is that going to work. I said it back soon as they said it, back in June of 2022. Right? I was just like, no, you're not going to get help from the supply side of things, because the supply side of things is not going to contribute to your expectations of bringing inflation down when the customer, the demand side of things, is going to be punished. It wasn't going to work. And yet here they are trying to claim that Private sector forecasters expected higher inflation in 5.1% at the year end of 2021, but also projected slowing to just over 2% by the year end of 2022. With the benefit of hindsight, we now know that most forecasters, ourselves included, vastly misjudged the persistence of inflation at the time. Well, had they watched the Uneducated Economist video, they wouldn't have misjudged it. They would have known exactly what was going to end up happening because I called it out right then. As soon as they said it, I'm like, no way. Like, I mean, I don't know where the delusional thought came from these bankers out there who just assumed that the supply side would just come roaring back to the idea that there was going to be no demand. That doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't even know how to even, like, fathom that, right? So I'm assuming they lied. They had to have known back then when they said it that they were not going to get help from the supply side. And now they can claim their ignorance right now towards it. They can say, oh man, we got it wrong. Weird. Everybody got it wrong. That's weird. You know, even the private forecasters got it wrong. Nobody saw this. Literally, right? Well, if that's the case, then the Uneducated Economist wouldn't have been able to call it out exactly in a video from June of 2022. Right? They have 150 of the top smartest economists over there, and not one of them thought like the Uneducated Economist did. Not a single one of them. I can't believe that. I don't believe that. Right? The Fed is lying about this. They want the persistent inflation expectations. They need it. Right? Now, one of the other things, and I'm just going to call it here pretty soon. One of the other things, if you go and you read this speech, there's a link down in the description for it. If you go and you read this speech, think about how many times they talk about forward guidance in this, and just replace the word forward guidance with credible threats. And you're going to find that the credible threat theory is running rampant through this speech. Right? For those of you who don't understand the credible threat theory, it's when the Federal Reserve uses their words to actually get the markets to behave in a fashion as if they had already done their actions. So if they were planning on cutting rates, if they make that announcement that they are cutting rates, then the economy will start behaving as if rates have already been cut. And now if you go and you go through this speech, if you look through it, you're going to find many, many examples of how it is that they use this credible threat. Now, again, they use the term forward guidance, but it's the same thing. We're going to cover this speech in a live stream. Like I said, I think this is a really good one for Sunday. It's a members only live stream. It costs $1 a month. So there's a link down in the description to it. Join the members only portion of this channel, and you'll have access to all the other member videos that I have done. They are very thorough. They're good. The comment section of those videos is just absolutely incredible. We have some of the most intelligent people who are part of this channel, who are trying to break this stuff down for themselves. So I really encourage everybody to check that out. But again, I just wanted to bring that up in that video to show how it is that the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves. Like, they didn't screw up. They didn't lie. This isn't, I mean, they didn't get it wrong. They're lying. Like, they're lying for the credible threat aspect of things. If people feel that they screwed up and they didn't know, they're like, oh man, we thought we were going to get help. Inflation's running persistent. Weird. That's really weird, right? I mean, it's not weird. This is exactly what they were looking for. And if you go back and you just listen to like what she was saying earlier, and that the inflation expectation to be considered, let me see here. Okay, to following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. But they don't give us any explanation of what some time is. They don't give us an idea of what moderately above is. They don't tell us what, the timeline, none of that stuff, right? They just basically saying, hey, we're going for an average of 2% over time, and we're not going to really tell you how we're going to figure that part out. And so then it becomes almost arbitrary to the Federal Reserve. All right, 273 people watching right now. I love it. Thank you so much for joining in on this channel. Let's talk about Brody's comment real quick, because he had a question on it. Talking about the analogy that I used of a job site and two guys working on the job site, one of them working on the ground, like the ground man, and another guy working up on like a second or third story. And as they're sitting there working throughout the day, all of a sudden a hammer comes flying off the second story and hits the guy on the ground and kills him. And now everybody wants to try and explain what it is that's happening. You could go to like the company and say it's their fault for putting these guys in this position. You can say like maybe the guy just like, did it on purpose by throwing the hammer down. There's all these different stories that could come up on what caused this event to take place, but ultimately it was gravity, right? Now, I know somebody kind of actually corrected that, because I'm no, physicist or anything, but they said it was mass and velocity, whatever, right? I mean, the idea behind it is that there was a natural force that brought that hammer down and it hit the guy, killing him, right? So now it was gravity that caused it. Now, if you go and you think about all the safety precautions that could have gone into it, right? The guy up on the second story should have been more careful. Perhaps the, foreman of the job site should have had a better safety instructions. Maybe, there could have been a whole bunch of different list of things, right? Ultimately, the guy on the ground is responsible for himself and positioning himself in a way that he doesn't get hit by the hammer, or if the hammer comes down, that he can move out of the way, right? To be paying attention to the facts of danger that are happening out there, because you never know what it is that's going to take place, but you know that there is a natural force of gravity, and that if something comes flying down at you, it's probably going to hurt and hit you. Now, I think Brody's question to it is like, are we here to just accept this fact, right? So now I was using the idea that the manufacturing base starts to leave a nation due to the high standard of living that that particular nation has been put themselves into, right? So if you raise your standard of living, you start importing more foreign production and exporting your manufacturing. And a lot of times there's people out there who try to come up with an idea on order to fix this. Now, there is no fixing this. It's cyclical. Like, you can't stop it from taking place. There is no at least I cannot find, there is no economic, like, historical event in which that they were able to bring manufacturing back in a meaningful way without totally crashing the system first, right? Because basically manufacturers are going to go where the most cheapest, efficient labor cost, land cost, manufacturing, and then distribution from, they're just going to naturally move into that position. So it's an economic force that is happening out there that you can't really prevent. And now the idea is that, are you just going to accept this idea, or are you going to do something about it? Because you can always do something about the idea that gravity exists, right? We've learned to fly planes. We can, hold on to the things without letting them go, right? And prevent gravity from actually taking place. But it doesn't mean that gravity isn't there, right? Same with the economic force. It is still there. Now, yes, you can do stuff about it, but you are always going to have that natural occurring force that is going to be there no matter what. So in order to maintain, it's not a naturally flowing thing. Now you are trying to resist what the natural flow of things is happening, right? You're trying to resist the fact that manufacturers are wanting to leave. You're trying to resist these things. And so you don't accept it, you're resisting against it, right? And in that sense, now you're in a constant battle of trying to maintain what it is that you're resisting, right? So whether it's subsidies or taxes or something of that nature, it will always be a force that you are constantly dealing with. And I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is just like, there's a place to be where where it's naturally occurring and flowing towards it, and then there's the other part where you are putting resistance and importance and, how else do you put it? It's like, you got one way where it naturally occurs, where it's flowing towards it, and then there's the other way where you are forcing the outcome to take place. Now, how long that can last, who knows? So I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't accept it. What I'm saying is like, there's a way that it goes naturally, and then there's a way that it's forcefully done. And now, in order to bring manufacturing back, it's going to have to be forcefully done in constant force being applied. All right, at least that's the way I kind of see it. All right, going into the comments section here. Let's talk about Brody here. Simon, totally agree. The Fed literally has a machine which produces free money They have all the brain power money can buy. They knew. They absolutely had to have known. That's why this speech is like so telling to me. It's just like, even the idea that you could eat, like, how do I even say this? Like, I cannot be that smart. Like, I cannot possibly be that smart that I could put out a video back in June of 2022 calling the Fed out saying this is not going to work at all. Like, no way does the Federal Reserve even think this, right? In fact, if I go back in and I play that, I think I even go in and talk about that. Hold on.
Less demand or more difficult demand out there. This is where the problem really starts to lie, because the Federal Reserve is really not trying to fix an inflationary problem. What they are trying to fix is an inflationary expectation problem. See, that's where the real problem with inflation comes, is because inflation expectation is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whether you think the prices are going to go up or down. Right now, we're experiencing the inflation expectation of higher prices, but it works completely the opposite.
So that's what it is. See, the Federal Reserve was trying to get the inflation expectation to be elevated because that was the major problem that they were experiencing. Remember, monetary policy for a low neutral interest rate world. It says today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate, which is another thing that Michelle Bowman goes into in this speech. That is the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. This is the part. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. That was the problem they needed to solve. They are totally solving that problem. They have it. Like, even in this speech, they're like, oh man, we got persistently high inflation. Darn. Well, that's not the problem. Your problem was that you had persistently low inflation. Now you got persistently high inflation. Problem solved. Right? That was the problem that they needed solved. I mean, she goes in and even talks about how, the speech is really telling. Like, I'm telling you guys, if you're not part of this channel, if you're not a member of this channel, this one speech will be well worth it, because you're going to really get a good grasp of monetary policy. And because these people speak in such a way that is very confusing, like they have like literally a language of their own. And if you're not in tune, if you're not privy to it, then it makes it very difficult to understand what it is that they're trying to communicate through these speeches. That's the point of the members only live stream, is that I break this stuff down so you can understand it, right? So that it's like, it's not confusing. It's not like, it's not obscure as much as it once was. It becomes very clear on what it is that they are attempting to do. And I'm trying to find where it is. Okay, here we go. When I joined so when she joined the FOMC, when she joined the Federal Open Market Committee, it was in late 2018. The same time this speech was given, right? Monetary policy for a low neutral interest rate world. She says, despite nearly a decade of accommodated monetary policy following the financial crisis and subsequent recession, one of the primary concerns was inflation had persistently been running slightly below the committee's 2% inflation target. Right? Even after all that accommodating, right? Despite nearly a decade of accommodative monetary policy following the financial crisis and subsequent recession, one of the primary concerns was that inflation had persistently been running slightly below the committee's 2% target. They failed to achieve their 2% target. Even after quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and 4, it failed. In 2018, they were worried, very worried. Why? There was recognition that the natural rate of employment may have been lower than many on the FOMC had estimated. Remember, the natural rates are not something that is pinpointable. Right? Nobody knows exactly where it is. They can assume, they can guess, they have these ideas, but then nobody knows exactly where the natural rate is. And they were assuming at that point that it was, like, what did they say? There was recognition that the natural rate of employment may have been lower than what the FOMC had estimated. They thought the natural rate was higher than what it was. And that inflation may have become less responsive to reductions in the unemployment rate. Right? So now, typically, this is something that a lot of economists have now pointed out, that the Federal Reserve and the Phillips curve is no longer a useful tool. So like the idea that if there was more people working have more money to spend starts adding into the economy and consumption, and that consumption starts driving the prices up, right? Now, if you lose your job, less consumption, prices come down. So this is how the Federal Reserve looked at how they can adjust inflation, is by how many jobs were actually occurring within the economy. And they were saying that the natural employment rate was a lot higher, was a lot lower than what they had anticipated. And by dropping the rates down to zero, they were not necessarily able to affect the unemployment like they once had, right? Creating the inflationary scenario that they would have expected coming from it. Let's see, may have been lower than the FOMC had estimated, and that inflation may have become less responsive to the reduction in unemployment. This recognition meant that preemptive increases in the Fed funds rate based on expected reductions in unemployment rate alone may not have been needed to keep inflation and inflation expectations aligned with the committee's 2%. So I know all that is very confusing, but ultimately the Federal Reserve was running out of monetary policy. They were not able to adjust their interest rates, creating the unemployment or employment situations that would then start impacting the inflation scenario. It was failing on them. And ultimately it was because they had the Fed funds rate too close to zero. They ran out of monetary policy. It was no longer effective. Goes in to talk about that. The central bank of the FOMC meeting discussion throughout 2019 was how monetary policy strategies and tools could best achieve the committee's dual mandate of price stability and maximum employment when structurally low interest rates and disinflationary forces kept inflation persistently under the committee's inflation target. Now, again, that is very confusing stuff, but ultimately they were running out of their policy. They were saying that the disinflationary forces, or the lack of inflation, that they could not get up to that 2% or above the 2% target, was due to the fact that they had that low interest rates. There was, going on with this, there was also a concern that the Fed funds rate, the FOMC key policy rate, was too close to the zero lower bound. Right? Quote, zero lower bound, that's zero, ineffective tools, and that the proximity could limit the committee's ability to respond effectively to the adverse shocks by using its primary monetary policy tool of lowering the target range for the federal funds rate. Right there, straight up, said it. We could not do it anymore. We were running out of monetary policies. We were screwed. This is the Federal Reserve straight up saying it right there. Let me read it again. Of course, they put it very lightly. We were concerned, There was also concern that the Fed funds rate, this is the FOMC's key policy rate, right? The Fed funds rate. This is what they use to adjust the interest rates within the banking system, the financial system. This is the FOMC's key policy rate was too close to the zero lower bound, right? That Fed funds rate was down near zero, and that this proximity, right, being close to the zero lower bound, could limit the committee's ability to respond effectively to adverse shocks by using our primary monetary policy tools of lowering the target range. They would not be able to do it because they were in the lower bound of zero. They couldn't work it anymore, right? So more broadly, many central banks around the world were grappling with the prospects of structurally lower interest rates due to the variety of factors, including demographic changes and higher savings rates, lower potential output of productivity growth, and the greater investment demand for safe assets like the Treasury securities. This is the exact same thing that John Williams was talking about back in 2018. Today's let me see here. Three main global trends account for the bulk of the decline of the natural rate over the quarter century. One is demographics. Wow, what did she say? Broadly, the world was grappling with the prospect of low interest rates. The factors included demographics. Wow, same thing. Okay. Populations were Asian. The second was productivity growth. What is she saying here? Lower potential output for productivity growth. Same thing. All right. Then he goes on to say the third was the heightened demand for safe and liquid assets, which led to a wider wedge between yields on safe government securities or central bank reserves and the yields on riskier assets such as corporate bonds. What does she say here? The greater investor demand for safe assets like the Treasury securities. Hasn't changed. See, this is where people are really, really lost. Right? They think that the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves day to day or maybe even week to week or month to month, but they're not. This is a game that they have been playing for years. Like literally, this is going back, 5 years now. That, what Michelle Bowman is talking about in this speech is the same thing that John Williams was talking about back in 2018 when it comes to their monetary policies. This doesn't change. I mean, it does change, but it doesn't change off of a whim of presidential elections or conditions within like war or whatever. Like that didn't change. Like the war came out after this, right? But the policy hasn't changed at all, right? I mean, it does change some, but it's not changing because of that or anything else out there, right? The only thing that the Federal Reserve is looking for is inflation expectation to remain well anchored at that 2% for the long run. But current inflation is not targeted at 2%. They do not go for a 2% target at all. And it's very important to understand that from the monetary policy strategies coming from the Fed. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't even matter if it's truthful or not. Right? Of all the information that they are using, the inflation numbers, the unemployment numbers, all that stuff. None of that stuff is important on whether or not they're even being truthful with those numbers. There are people who could come out and say, well, the real number is this and the real number is that or whatever. It doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter. You know why? It's because we're not the ones who are conducting monetary policy. They are. And we have to look at what they are looking at because they are the ones who are going to be changing their monetary policy. And it's up to us to understand what it is that they are up to so that we can position ourselves in the most appropriate spot, right? It doesn't matter what the truth is. It literally doesn't matter what the truth is because even the truth is not going to change the way they conduct themselves. Only the information that they are receiving. And we also have to understand that it's within an economic model that they are using. It's literally like a program that they punch the numbers into and then look at the end to see what the response is and what they are supposed to do with it. That's how their models work. So they have to use these numbers. And we have to look at the numbers that they are talking about in order to understand what it is that they plan on doing with the monetary policy. Whether it is accurate or not, it doesn't matter. Right? Okay. Wow, I'm really going off. Let's go here. Okay, effortless has it all figured out. Let's drink the Kool-Aid while wearing Nike Sharks. Look around, buddy. All right. Brody, you just realized that? What are you talking about? What's a good strategy? Effortless. Effortless again. It's why you lost your country. Okay. All-Nighter says, I exercise my personal liberties. Effortless needs to learn what I know. Oh, boy, it's getting warm in here. All right. No river behind you, Sam. No, it's because I actually wanted to use the Wi-Fi from work, so I'm parked right in front of the store right now. So, you know what's up. Yep, warm. Yeah, it is. Ignore effortless, U.E. All right, will do. Anybody got any questions about what's going on today? I mean, I thought that this was good. I thought this speech was really, it was very telling, in my opinion, of what it is that the Federal Reserve is planning on doing with their monetary policy and what they have been doing. And so when people are like, trying to figure out what it is that they tried to predict what the Federal Reserve is going to do, it's reading stuff like this that is going to give you that idea. That's going to give you, the better understanding of how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be conducting themselves. I listen to a lot of economists out there, and I don't know where they come up with their ideas, with their logic. I mean, obviously they don't listen to stuff like this. They don't read things like, the monetary policies. They don't take it into consideration. They I guess they just make shit up. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't make things up. I leave links down in the description. I put, I go and find the research. I do find the documents and stuff like that before I come out and just kind of babble off some stuff. Even though a lot of people disagree with it, I mean, that's totally cool. Like, I mean, nobody's going to agree with everything that I have to say, but at least I have something to back it up, right? I mean, I'm not, I mean, I'm the uneducated economist. I can't like just make things up. I have to have like proof, Have you seen James O'Keefe video of the undercover reporter speaking with a principal economist at the Fed? Nope. No, I haven't, and I don't think I really need to. I think I've heard a lot of people give me their impressions saying, what it is that they feel that the Fed is up to, that they have insider knowledge or something like that. That's cool. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to deny that they might even, have some legitimate, aspects to it. What I guess I'm going from is that I have been fairly accurate on a lot of the stuff that I have predicted. I mean, that video alone was 100% accurate. Like, the moment that I heard that the Federal Reserve was looking to help from the supply side of things, I was like, you guys are nuts. That ain't true. There's no way. Like, there's no way that you guys are truly looking for help from the supply side of things. Because if I could just immediately think that ain't gonna work, then I know that there was other economists out there at the Federal Reserve, some really smart dudes, who probably had that same idea, right? But of course, within this statement right here, it's very weird. Nobody knew. Huh, even private forecasters didn't see this. I was like, no, that ain't right. That is not right. All right. You make it to your destination. Okay, remember the 2.5 trillion the day before 9/11 went missing? Every YouTuber says others don't use logic. Well, okay. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, I mean, I know other YouTubers out there. There's some really incredibly smart people out there who are a hell of a lot more educated on this stuff than I am. They have degrees, they're financial advisors, they're investors, they're business owners, they're politicians, whatever it is that they got going on out there. I really don't know anybody who is covering and so adamant about it on some of these things that I am covering like I have done. Like, I just don't know anybody out there who is doing it. The average inflation rate over time was probably one of the biggest things that everybody missed. Like, I cannot find anybody who is discussing or talking about the average inflation rate over time, how it is that there's no mathematical formula for it, bringing up all the times the Federal Reserve is discussing average inflation rate over time, and yet pretty much every single mainstream media article and commentator and everybody else talks about the 2% target. That doesn't exist. Literally doesn't exist. Every one of their strategies, their ideas, their information, all their economic models that they use, everything is inaccurate. Every one of them. Because they think about a 2% target as opposed to a 2% average inflation rate over time. That little tiny, which seems very tiny, minuscule difference is absolutely huge for everything. Even the Federal Reserve said that they are not going for a 2% target, but one that is achieving above 2% marginally or whatever for some time. That says we don't use a 2% target. That is straight up saying it, right? But yet everybody sees the Federal Reserve is trying to get for 2%. They're not. They're straight up not. So every single economist that I've ever heard talk about that, I lose credit. They lose credibility with me because they need to incorporate average inflation rate over time into their strategies or else they're doing it wrong. And that's all I can say about that. And since I can't find anybody else who really talks about average inflation rate, and I'm looking for other people who have opinions that either validate or, are different from mine. Like, I'm looking for the people who talk about, who have done the research, who try to understand what average inflation rate over time really means coming from the Federal Reserve. I can't really find anybody who talks about it except for the Fed. All right, moving on. UE, you have a very good outlook on things, but we all know the House wins. Keep your house in order. All right, credible threats. Haha, yeah. All just distraction to confuse us all. Having the Fed monetary headroom is all the Fed wants. What's Web 3.0? Have heard of that. Thanks for these video streams. Yeah, you got it, Oldsmobile Thompson. Yeah, you bet, man. I thank you guys for being here. We got 376 people watching right now with 118 likes. If you're really enjoying this video, please go hit that like button. Algorithm loves to see like buttons, comments, any kind of engagement within the video. It grabs the video and spreads it around for more people to join in. All right, what is your calculations, UE? UE on fire. Love it, man. Solid commentary. Well, thank you, CBR8. Man, I really appreciate the comment. You the man, UE. Thank you, guys. I'm really curious what your gripe is, though. I guess talking about maybe... All right, this week, for us working class individuals, get creative and muster up the cash for our first stonks. Back down to the bottom here. What does the Fed do? They cannot raise rates. Look at all the interest on our debt. You know, I heard back when the Federal Reserve had Fed funds rate at the lower bound of 0, that they would never be able to raise rates. In fact, it was Donald Trump, candidate Trump, who said it's a big, fat, ugly bubble, and if the interest rates go up even a little bit, the whole thing's going to come crashing down. Everybody said that there was no way that the interest rates are going to rise. You know, here we are, right? In fact, I remember doing a video when they were interviewing Alan Greenspan, and it was, we had, you know, the Fed funds rates were at 0, and they asked Alan Greenspan, hey, there's talk out there that interest rates will never rise again, and he went and he laughed, and he asked her, like the lady interviewing him, he was like, oh, wait a minute, what? Say that again? And she goes, well, considering that interest rates will probably never rise again. And he goes, yeah, okay, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, right? And he like straight up laughed in her face. You know, this is Alan Greenspan. He's usually a pretty like chill dude. He doesn't really do anything. But he was like, he found that very comical statement saying, okay, yeah, good luck with that one. You know, because he knew that interest rates were going to rise at some point. And when I saw how confident he was with his laughter, like the disbelief, you know, like he found that so comical, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to kind of go with that, and I'm going to believe that interest rates are probably going to be rising into the future. And sure enough, here we are, right? Because everybody said that we were never going to be able to get here without the whole thing coming undone. Well, here we are, okay? Correct. The thing for the Fed is not the correct thing for the economy. Over the last decade, the Fed says 31% inflation. Meanwhile, McDonald's put in 100% price inflation in the same time frame. I think you nailed the analysis, Simon. I watched Jeff Snyder's video yesterday, and he's been on the disinflationary ramp for months and barely acknowledged the U-turn. He's smart, but I think you're wise. Well, thank you, Philip. I really appreciate that. And, you know, here's the thing. Like, I'm not that smart. Like, I mean, I like to think that I'm pretty smart. You know, there was, you know, when I was in school, I didn't do very well. Like I barely graduated high school. In fact, I had to kind of cheat my way through to get the diploma. But I'm really good at problem solving. In fact, that was one of the things when, you know, they were trying to figure out how come I had these learning disabilities and stuff. When I went and did these tests, right, to figure out where it is that I was struggling, you know, they found that I had reading comprehension disability, right? So like I couldn't retain the stuff that I was reading. And then I had a problem solving IQ that was off the charts. Like I could put little tiny pieces of puzzles and figure out all these things, you know, and come up with like these little brain game things. I could figure them all out really easy. So I was good at problem solving, but I wasn't good at reading retention, which made it very difficult to go through school, right? Because everything is about reading retention when you're in school. So as I started to figure out how it is that I can like absorb this information, it started off with a lot of lectures and video watching and stuff like that. And then I had to do very short readings, like 5 minutes. If I did any more than that, I would stop, I couldn't really pay attention. Now I can start doing a lot more. Like I can actually read for a couple of hours and actually be retaining it. But it was something that I had to develop even over the course of having this channel. It's taken me a while to eventually get here. So it's not a matter of being like a smart guy who has all this economic information and stuff like that. It's really just trying to understand and break it down, the monetary policy coming from the Fed's own words. Reading these speeches was very difficult. Like you would read a paragraph and I would be like, man, what in the world are they talking about? Like I don't understand I understand the words, like I understand the definitions of the words, but I don't understand the context of this stuff, right? And so I would sit there and I would just read it over and over again until I practically memorized this stuff, and I would go and research whatever it was that they were talking about until I finally clued it all together. Sometimes it would take me a week or two to get through a single speech, right? I'm just reading the exact same thing over and over again, trying to break it down to figure out what it was that they were talking about. I did that over and 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 over again. All right? Until eventually I just started kind of figuring this stuff out. Hardest part about this is taking on a political view at the same time. That is probably one of the most difficult parts of trying to understand the monetary policy, because most people want to incorporate the fiscal policy into the monetary policy. These are two different things. Okay? And once you can separate that in your mind, like once you've figured out the difference between what's happening with the fiscal policy and what's happening with monetary policy, and how these two are different and how they do work together at times, pretty much all the time, but they are very different things, right? That is really, because most people are very understanding and very aware and looking at fiscal stuff, looking at what their politicians are doing and saying and behaving like. But very rarely does anybody actually study what the Federal Reserve is talking about, their monetary policy, what it is that they have been talking about going back 20 years, talking about the deflationary scenario that Ben Bernanke was scared of, and all the tools and things that the Federal Reserve would need in order to combat that deflationary scenario, and then to see every one of those tools being deployed right now. Okay? What does that say? The Fed is scared deeply about deflation. Inflation, not a big deal. Totally wanted the inflation. They want a higher inflation expectation. And the way that they achieve it is by making sure that people are concerned that there is going to be rampant inflation going into the future. Is the way that they secure that inflation expectation going into the future. They are not worried about that. Right? No matter how much they say it, even in this speech, they try to put off that idea. It's wrong. That is the forward guidance that they are using to keep the inflation expectation elevated, so they can continue to operate their monetary policy with a higher Fed funds rate, because being too close to the lower bound of zero gave them ineffective monetary policy tools for combating a downturn in the recession, or a downturn or a recession. Simple, right? It's hard. But once you get it, it's simple. It's not that hard, right? But what's really difficult is now people are going to incorporate election year, or make sure that Trump doesn't win or something, like, I don't know, like all these things that just don't make any sense at all when it comes to monetary policy, but yet I hear it running so heavy. I mean, even with the communications that I have with guys here at work and stuff like that, they do that. They incorporate the fiscal policy right into what it is that interest rates are going to be going into the future, and then they think that it's Biden that's doing it. And I'm like, man, this is so like, and you guys, and they vote, and they vote. So I'm like, I don't know what to do except for what I'm doing. It's just like, okay, well, I'll just put out another video. All right, you guys are so awesome. I got to go back to work. Snyder is correct about money supply. UE is speaking on interest rates. Simon, you're very smart. Well, thank you, Brody. I appreciate you, man. All right, you guys are awesome. Bud, thank you very much for joining the channel, man. You're going to really enjoy that video that we do this weekend, and all the other live, member-only videos that we've done. They're very, to me, they're some of the most informative videos that you could ever possibly watch, right? Because I'm breaking down this stuff, these speeches, like word for word, getting through all of it. Alright. God, I love this channel. Salute to the mods as well. Cool people. Yes, they are. I gotta say it one more time and then I'm gonna go. I have the best channel for economics on YouTube, and it's not because of the channel and the information that I'm putting out, it's because of the comment section that I have, right? I believe that this comment section for this particular channel is pure gold, and it's far better than most of them that you see out there. We are really trying to understand this stuff for ourselves in a way that is going to be most helpful for us and our families and our way of life. And I don't know anybody else who's doing it quite like this. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Uneducated Economist. I gotta go back to work. He let me know.